Welcome. This presentation is all about transitions. We're going to look at 3 different areas. We're going to look at why transitions are difficult, school supports, and home supports. This presentation was originally part of the education discussion, and normally we would have a short presentation followed by an open discussion where all the participants were able to bring their experiences to the table. If you haven't met me before, I am Paula. I am the Education Advisor for Adoption UK in Scotland. I am an adoptive parent to a wonderful 13-year-old girl who is just coming to the end of her first year at high school. So for me, transitions are still fairly fresh in my head. In terms of my education background, I have worked in a secondary school as an English teacher. I have worked in a primary school as a class teacher, and my most recent education post is as a support for learning teacher in quite a large primary. So let's move on. Why are transitions difficult? So why are transitions difficult? Children who have experienced care are likely to have been through severe transitions in the past. They will have been terrifying, and they will have been experienced through a survival lens. They might have happened multiple times, and children will lock these memories away in their body, even if they have no conscious memory of the experience. And again, even just thinking about removal from the family home is hugely traumatic, and the body will remember all of these transitions, and every little transition that we have has the potential to trigger those feelings that are locked away in the body. Children who've experienced care are likely to have felt unsafe and quickly learn that adults can't be trusted and that they can only depend upon themselves. So sometimes there's this overpowering need for them to feel in control. Many things have happened to them, and they've had no control over these really big things of, who do you live with, for example. And transitions will trigger that survival system, and the feelings are linked to memories, which can get muddled. So within the transition itself, there's a little bit of muddling of the feelings that you have. Are they related to the transition that you're experiencing right now, or are they connected with transitions that have happened in the past? So it can really help to anchor children in the present. They might also be anxious about leaving parents, and it's not uncommon for children who have got delayed development to still have separation anxiety much later than their peers. You might have a child that's 8, 12, 14 who's still got difficulty leaving you. And that ability to tolerate the separation can also fluctuate depending on what else they're having to manage at that time. And then we've got internal stress. The nervous system is impacted by what's going on inside us. We might think about the 5 common senses when we think about our sensory system, but we've also got interoception, we've got proprioception, and we've got the vestibular sense, which all play a part in how much we can tolerate at any one time. So interoception is what helps us to understand what's going on inside our body. That's the sense that's going to tell us if we're hungry, if we're full, if we're cold, or we're thirsty. We've got proprioception, which is telling the body where it is in space using muscles and joints. And that's going to play quite a big part in self-regulation, coordination, body posture, awareness. We've got the vestibular sense, which relates to our sense of balance, and it provides constant feedback to our body. If these senses aren't working so well, then the children are having to manage internal stress, which we don't see, but it's at play all the time. And then we've got on top of that, we've got any external stresses. So if we think about the school environment, for example, the number of people, the unpredictability, the noise, the information overload, the demands of relationships, the smells, the expectations of other people, it can be really hard for children to screen out unwanted sensory information. So things like the buzz of the lights, the passing traffic. All of these things create extra stress for the child. So, when we often hear people saying, oh, they went from 0 to 100 in a split second, it's not like that, because the children are having to manage so much in the way of the stress that's inside the body that we don't see. And of course, other people's nervous systems also play a part. If you're next to somebody who's got a nice calming presence, that's going to help you to feel calm too. But if you're next to somebody else who's very stressed and sending out vibes of dysregulation, that's going to unsettle you as well. So, within our classroom environments and our school systems, there's a lot for our children to deal with. We've also got executive function skills, and these are the skills that work together to help us achieve our goals. And when we have deficits in one or more of these areas, it makes it much more difficult for us to achieve a goal. Loads of children have difficulties with these skills, but trauma, ASD, FASD, these are likely to impact or impair the development of these skills. And these skills are fairly crucial to experiencing success in a sort of traditional school setup. And if you have delayed skills or impaired skills, you're going to have to work much, much harder to be able to achieve. It's not impossible, but you are going to have to work harder to do that. So children might need additional time during transition times when our children are coping with extra stresses. Adults sometimes give contrary messages of how you need to be a bit more independent because you're growing up and you've moved on to the next stage. And there's the expectation that children have to raise their game. But during the actual transition process, you might actually see the opposite of that. You might see a lesser ability to be able to cope just because they're having to manage all this extra stress in their body. So maybe during the actual transition, we need to up the supports that we offer as an adult. So we might chunk the instructions more, we might use timers, we might gradually build up the expectations again, and then pare back on the supports once they've kind of got over the raw part of the transition. So again, thinking back to my daughter going to high school, there were lots of fantastic supports in place, but for those first few weeks in that new building where she didn't know anyone and had to build up relationships with people, I think she was so heightened that she didn't eat or drink in school at all for the first couple of weeks. And that just shows how much of the survival system was kicking in for her. But then in time, those things settled down again, and she got back to the more confident, independent person that I'd got used to seeing. And fear is something as well. Children can't often articulate fear or anxiety, and it plays out in their behaviour. And it's not irrational fear, because it's based on experiences that have happened to them in the past and those feelings that the body remembers. So if we as adults can try not to respond to the behaviour that we see that's causing us concern, but if we can stand back and think, what's causing that behaviour, then we're more likely to be able to help the child make links. We can help them by wondering out loud. Oh, I wonder if that's how you felt when you moved in here with me. You didn't know me, I was a stranger. Look at us now, we're all cuddled up in the sofa. We just needed a wee bit of time to get to know each other. And that will provide the message that they'll be able to repeat that experience and get to know someone else. School and home environments. So as we move on to looking specifically at school strategies, a quick reminder that our children often present very differently in the school environment compared with the home one. So the home environment is likely to feel more predictable, safe, and the child's going to have more autonomy in the home. In school, by comparison, there's a lot more sensory stressors to manage, and there's a lot less autonomy for the child. So it makes sense that the child is likely to be on a sort of higher alert, if you like. But I like to think that we as parents can help the children to build some sort of bridge between home and school, which might help the child to manage the transition between those two environments. So some things that might help: routine, having the same routine on each day, or you know, Monday is a swimming day, Tuesday is a day when you go to the park, or something that helps the children to be able to mark the progression of time. It just gives them a sense of predictability. If we as parents can facilitate decompression too, so it might be that after school we exercise, or before or after school we walk part of the way, we ride part of the way, or we stop by the park, or we have TV time when we come home for half an hour, and there's no expectation, but we put something in place that allows the child to adjust their own sensory system. And nurture is another one too. Thinking back as a parent, when I went to pick my daughter up from school, I always had something to eat and something to drink with me, because that's such an integral part of providing nurture, and that provided a kind of release for her, whether it was sucking something or whether it was crunching something, but just helped her to make that transition. Again, you could offer control, because I get thinking back to the lack of control that children had in school, but suddenly saying, oh, it's your job, you can be responsible for turning on the light, or you can, it's, you know, you're the person that's got the key and you're going to let everybody in, or offering them choices. You know, do you want pasta, or do you want potato? Do you want, I don't know, the dumping ground, or do you want, gosh, I can't think of anything else anymore that you see on TV, but to offer choices will help. And again, thinking maybe about play skills or play choices that are going to promote relaxation. So having Play-Doh, having Lego, painting, music, puzzles, something that's going to help the brain to calm and to sort and to process, but not really put any demands on the child. And then having quiet time that's built into the day, just to allow the child to adjust their sensory system. Homework, you might not do homework full stop. It might just be far too much. But again, thinking about my own experiences, keep demands low, because your child will have worked harder at school than most other people. Any task that comes back from school, can you make it more manageable? If it's a reading task, it might be that you share that reading and you do page about or line about. If it's a writing task, it might be that they do all the creative thinking and you do the scribing for them. Anything that's going to help them to meet the learning intention, but the other parts that are maybe not the main focus of the learning, if you can take some of the load for them, then that will make it a little bit more manageable for them. In terms of school and home, and thinking about those different presentations of children, it's really important for school and home to try to be on that same team. So having open, respectful communication both ways is really helpful, and presenting a united front to your child, that both parties are in it to support the child and make sure that the child is getting the best out of their education. If you're finding it tricky to communicate with school, try to gather people around that multi-agency meeting that are going to be able to advocate for your child in the same way that you are. So you might find an educational psychologist or an OT has a similar understanding of need, particularly if your child is masking, and you might be able to help move on someone else's point of view who's maybe not seen enough evidence within the school context. It just helps to move them on. Yeah, so always important to gather support around you. In terms of enhanced transition, what might you expect? These are all the things that I think you might be able to expect if your child is experiencing an enhanced transition. So in Scotland, we have GIRFIC meetings, getting it right for every child meetings. So any child who's been in care is presumed to have additional support needs. And you would be entitled to, I think, to expect one of these meetings at some point. And this meeting will ensure plans are developed to meet any additional support needs that your child has. And the meetings generally follow the same structure. They look at the child's strengths, what the concerns are, what the strategies are, and any action points which might support the needs. And at this meeting, you can address any concerns you have about moving between the two schools, concerns about moving to a new teacher, and you can lay out the supports that are needed. And you should get a chance to meet new staff members too, and share assessment data, develop common strategies. When the child actually transitions between years or from school to school, there are procedures in place to pass on information to new teachers. So for a child with additional support needs, you would expect the strategies to be shared. And there's often a set form that a school will have to pass on information. But as a parent, if you were concerned that something might not be included, or you want to be doubly sure that the information is being passed on, you might want to develop your own communication passport. And there's lots of different templates that are available if you Google communication passports for schools. And you could share your child's likes, their dislikes, any triggers, any strategies that work, and any tricky subject areas. And it's certainly something that I've done as a parent in the past, just prepared that little sheet for class teachers, and then maybe asking for a quick meeting just to touch base with them shortly into the new term. Often schools will facilitate tours for children, and you might choose to do this for the very first time at the end of a school day when the school's quiet. And you could do this with your child, or sometimes schools will organise that for your child, and the child will go up in a small group and they'll see around the building and they'll meet new members of staff. All of these things are really part of the enhanced transition. And schools might have a small group of pupils do a project over a few weeks. They might get to know the building and build up relationships with key staff members and make connections with other pupils prior to standard transitions. And if it's going from nursery into primary school, there'll also be a sort of standard transition day that children will be invited to, all children will be invited to. And the same going from primary 7 into S1, you might expect a 2 or a 3 day visit where all the children will move up into S1 for a couple of days to see what it's like. So that would be standard. But in addition to that, if you're part of an enhanced transition, you will maybe get those extra little visits too. And schools will share information about new teachers too. There might be a sheet with a photo or some information or a wee video link of the teacher talking or telling a story. The teacher might do a question and answer session, or they might read a story over a video call. And the child might go and visit that teacher and introduce themselves. They might do a wee handover themselves. They might have a wee sheet that shares something about themselves, just to build up some sort of familiarity before the summer. And if you've got a teacher that's kind of aware of these things, the new teacher might send out a little postcard or something during the summer just to keep that link going. And there's nothing to stop you as a parent doing the same thing, filling in a wee postcard from your child to the teacher. Some schools or local authorities might run activities during the summer to help keep connections going for children. So they might do sports activities, like an outdoor forest school type activity where you kind of build a fire and cook on it. So my daughter was very lucky, and she had 3 days of activities like that with a group of 10 children just before she started high school. Some of the activities are on site so that she could see into the new building, and some of those were off site where she was developing confidence and self-esteem. It's all done through a really nurturing atmosphere. Generally, schools have an established buddy programme too, where older learners are buddied with younger ones to help them during those first couple of weeks into their new school. So you'll have an S6 pupil, for example, who kind of buddy up with an S1 class and take them as they move from one subject to another one. And you might have primary 6s or 7s buddied with primary 1s, and they'll meet them and they'll play with them in the school playground. And they might even do things like they might read stories with them or do different activities. And generally both sets of children and young people benefit from that. Flexible timetable is another really interesting one. So sometimes new pupils, often in primary 1, might have a staggered start. So they might only go to primary school for a short time, and it might only be part of the class that go, and then they build up to a full day. And I think what happens now is they do that very quickly. But for children who have got additional support needs, you might wish to pursue a more flexible timetable. And you would have to do that in discussion at your GIRFIC meeting and with members of staff. And you can also do things like, as a parent, really thinking about your child's needs. And if your child, is very much affected by the busyness of the school and the noise of transitions, you might go in 15 minutes later than everyone else and have a soft start, or leave the building before everybody else does. And you can have these conversations during the GIRFIC meetings, and school can adjust what's on offer to suit your child. These are transition supports that exist more generally, because transitions are there throughout the whole school day as the children move from activity to activity or class to class. And this is just a range of some of the things that you might be able to do either as a parent or as a teacher that provide some sort of support. So maybe the biggest one is the sensory regulation strategies. And again, thinking about all those stresses that are internal that we can't see. And if you're interested in that, we often run sensory regulation training too. Or zones of regulation is another framework which you could Google that has a lot of really, really interesting and quite simple, I think, ideas about how you can help children to develop regulation independence. Some of the things that might help, you could do things like, you could give a countdown to the change, or, it could be by minute, by number, by colour, or it could be song based. In fact, putting music on during transitions with a beat that's a very regular beat can be a really, really good thing to help regulate children. Giving the child a job to do during that transition, it's your job to collect the books. Often carrying something with a little bit of weight can be very grounding for children. It might be that they have something in their hand to fidget with, that every time they have to line up, they have to pick something up and take something with them. I would say it's really important to pay attention to sensory regulation throughout the whole day so that children get the right level of sensory input. And again, as a parent, you can think about sensory snacks. So crunchy carrots, thick yogurt drinks with a straw, or again, thinking about the beginning and the end of the school day, activities that have got some spinning involved, or balancing, or doing some sort of press ups. All of these things can just help help the children to manage that sort of internal sensory system. Safety awareness. What clues does the child have that they're safe during the transition? So again, anchor the child in the present, remind them that they've managed these things before. Think about where they are now, who they're with, what they're doing. You can provide a visual reminder in the form of a photo strip. You could take a transition object, thinking about Suzanne Zedek and the teddies, which can provide comfort. Things to keep them close to you, maintain an eye contact. If the teacher can do that, that's great. Maintain connection. The teacher might say, "You walk with me," or they might say, "Can you shut the door when everyone's out and then you come back to the front?" Or they might say, "I've got to check on this other group. I'll be back to see how you're doing in a minute. Or look after this object here until I come back." Keep them in your line of vision. maintain regular eye contact, find something to laugh about with them. All of those things will help to create connection, and make sure the support plan has been shared with all the adults in the school so that there's consistent use of strategies between classes and teachers. And really important to have consistent language too. Using visuals to support language processing is really helpful. When we're stressed, we don't have the same access to our logical brain, so we might not be able to follow the verbal instructions as well as we would at other times, even when when we're very bright, when we're very articulate, when we've got great understanding. Sometimes having that visual just reduces stress. And be consistent in language. Be consistent when dealing with things that have gone wrong. I've got a very nice reflective practice sheet, which I've picked up from somewhere, that's got visuals on it, and it's got a set of questions, and if something's gone wrong, you follow the questions and you circle the some of the things that are the things that went wrong for you or the person that you're dealing with, and it just takes the edge of having to have eye contact with someone. It keeps the focus on the positive and makes sure that there's no kind of additional shame when you're talking through something. Our children need us to be their brain and make connections for them. We often find ourselves trying to replicate their early life experiences, and the more we talk explicitly about what is happening to them, the more opportunity that there is for them to make connections, especially if we think about how many times we need to repeat something for it to become a habit. And at this point, I'm thinking about if you had a toddler, you had a baby, and it's the baby's crying, and you're saying, oh, you're crying, I think you're hungry, are you hungry? You talk to them all the time, and you explain what's going on and what you're doing to calm them down. And sometimes our children still need us to do a wee bit of that, even when they're a lot older. Routines connects back to safety awareness, trying to be as predictable as possible, because that reduces anxiety when we know what's happening next. So having a routine during transitions brings in a level of predictability. So it might be that when you line up, the child always grabs the go bag with the fiddle toy in it, and they know that that's what they do. Most classes use visual timetables, and it can be really helpful to introduce a change or a surprise card that you can then pop onto your timetable in retrospect, just so that you're reinforcing the fact that that's okay, there's been a change, we deal with it. Change is the one thing that we can usually always guarantee is going to be there. And again, I've said this already, share plans so that everybody is aware. And sometimes I think, as a parent, we need to be sure about the power that we have. So probably looking down this list, you might find that you already do all of these. It's really helpful when parents can let teachers know that the child might be feeling a wee bit more fragile that day or needs a bit of extra support. Or if there's likely to be something triggering that's happening, or if you're concerned that information's been missed in a handover, you do your own handover sheet. As our children's understanding develops, this might be relevant, and we might want to share something with staff. So for example, what I mean by that is, at a certain age, a child's understanding of their life story might shift. Their processing has moved on a wee bit. So it might be relevant to say, to a teacher, you might just find that they've got questions about their foster family, or they've got questions about birth family at this particular moment, and just flag it up. And then you might just say, if you happen to hear anything, let me know and I'll follow that up at home. Advocacy. You are your child's biggest advocate. Sometimes you might need to bang on your drum and make sure that you're part of that GIRFEC system, particularly if you've not been offered an appointment. But keep in mind, you've got one child, and the teacher will be advocating for the 30 children that are in their class. More if you're in secondary school, you might see 200 kids in a day. Teachers will have limited time, but they will want the best for your child. There's no question of that. They will be doing their best to support your child, but they'll need time to gather information, to be able to respond to a query. So I said this before, at the GIRFEC meeting, use the voices of supporting professionals to advocate for your child too. And do keep in mind that your child's behaviour might be different in school. So teachers will be responding to the evidence that they see. We rely on the evidence that we see to inform our views, and it will take time for a teacher's understanding of your child to catch up, if you like, to where you are. And it will never catch up really to where you are because you spend more time with them. But we are all on a journey. It's not plain sailing. When I think about what I know about adoption now and what I knew when I first started on the journey, even though I'd done lots of reading, I know far more now, and I know far more about my child now and why she behaves in the way that she does. And I might do things differently now compared to when I was 2 years into being a parent. So a teacher's on a journey too, and they will need time to get to know your child. You can practice at home, you can rehearse things at home, you can walk the route to school, you can try the bus route, you can role play meeting new teachers or new pupils, role play typical conversations, rehearse the problems. And that can give the child a plan for when these things crop up. You can visit the school during the summer, even if it's just walking by the school or going to the park. You can wonder what the teacher is doing. It would be lovely if old and new teachers could send postcards during the holiday, but it might not be possible. Sometimes, teachers might do things like give the child something from the school to look after during the holiday, and then they bring it back. But like I said earlier, you can also do some of that too. You can suggest those things to teachers, and you can also send a letter or a postcard. There's nothing to stop you doing that. We have on Adoption UK Scotland, we have an education page that's got lots of different resources on it, and there is a transition fact sheet on that page that's got lots of these suggestions. There's also a checklist for managing the primary to secondary transition. I hope that you found some of those things useful. If you have any questions specifically about transition, that you can request an education call back, just drop us an email at scotland@adoptionuk.org.uk.